Hi. So I think I have about an hour. I have a lot more to talk about than 1 hour, so I'm going to try and make it a little quick. Is everybody okay with a slightly higher tempo? That's going to work? All right, cool. If anything goes too fast, I'll try and leave time for Q&A at the end. If we don't have time, find me online, find me in the hallway, find me wherever, and just ask your questions then, okay? Let's see. Is everything here? Yep. Cool. So my name is Rami Ismail. I'm a Dutch-Egyptian game developer. I used to run a game studio called Vlambeer. We're best known about games with, for games with explosions. I did a game about collecting crates with explosions, a game about mutants with explosions, a game about airplane with explosions, and a game about fishing with explosions. I'm also known for PressKit, which was a tool to make press kits. It's now kind of the industry standard. That was not intended. I was just lazy. I run a conference called GameDev.world, which is an online conference where we translate all our talks to the 8 most common languages on Earth. I hosted a panel called Number One Reason to Be, where we flew people from around the world to speak at GDC. I write a newsletter called Leveling the Playing Field, which is a free newsletter with advice on game development and entrepreneurship. And I tweet too much. If you know me from Twitter, my apologies. Before we continue on the talk, I do have a little disclaimer. Every talk that you've seen today, every talk that you will see in the rest of your life, and every talk you've ever seen, they're being given by people. That might sound obvious, but I want you to think about the people that's standing there talking, right? Everybody has their history in game development. Everybody has the things that work for them. Everybody has their own survivorship biases. And effectively what it comes down to is when I started in game development back in 2010, the best way to start in game development was to make a Flash game, sell it, get some money, and then make more Flash games. So if you're going to ask me how to start in independent game development, it is get a time machine, make Flash games, right? I can't tell you exactly what works at any moment in time, but what I do know is that there are consistent things that over time have always helped or always helped people make better games. So if you hear in my talk a little bit of an anti-publisher bias, that's because there is one, right? I came from a time where publishers did not exist. We were Devolver Digital's first signed title ever with Serious Sam the Random Encounter. That was their first ever indie game. We thought they were a bunch of suits, right? And back then you didn't need publishers because there were no publishers. So you weren't competing with publishers. Now, 2024, launching an indie game without a publisher is harder than ever. Because they have a marketing budget, they have a press budget, they have all these opportunities. Are publishers bad? That's not what I'm saying. Publishers definitely create opportunities that didn't exist before, but they have changed how the industry works. And part of me resents them for it, and part of me is thankful to them for it. So if you hear that shine through a little bit, it's because it's there, okay? With that said, that's sort of my disclaimer. So I want you to remember that if I say anything that makes you go, can I curse here? All right. Sorry? Okay, so I can. That's my only memory of university. If you listen to me talking and think, oh, listen, that's full of shit, ignore me, right? But if there's anything here where you're like, you know what, that might apply to me, just take it with you, do your own thing. And if you do something that's completely opposite from what I said and it works out, please message me to rub it in and tell me, like, you were wrong, it worked, right? Like, I will just be very happy for your success. This place changes so incredibly fast. Things that were true, I actually saw on the final slides of the previous talk, things that were true a year ago are no longer true now. It would even be 6 months, right? Things just move so incredibly rapidly that I'd just be happy to hear that something else worked, right? So I want to have a bit of a strange talk, because most talks are either about creativity, about how to make interesting games, right? Or they're about production. The sort of business reality of shipping a game. And there's not a lot of talks about the glue that sort of sits in between. And I actually think most of the indie games that I work with, that I consult with, when they fail because of that. They don't fail because they don't have a good game. They don't fail because they're not thinking about production. They fail because they don't connect the two in a good and structural way, in a way where you get the best game possible with the amount of time and money that you have, right? And so I want to talk about the messy stuff in between. The stuff that actually makes games, right? And for that, we kind of have to zoom out a little bit. Like, first of all, you've got the part of games that is creative work. Now, creative work is messy, right? It's per definition, it's messy. It's unpredictable. We don't exactly know what we're making. We don't exactly know where we're going. We're experimenting. We're learning. Game development is a bit like growing a plant, right? Like you put it somewhere, you think it'll go that way, it goes that way. What do you do, right? And so creativity is this messy, untangible, sort of unpredictable thing that is part of our life. On the other end, you have production, which is the reality of we have a certain amount of money, we have a certain amount of time, we have a certain amount of people, and by the time we're done with this thing, we need to make money, right? This game needs to get done, this game needs to get shipped, this game needs to earn enough money for us to continue. And now these two roles in a good game production, they're actually sort of separated out. So on the teams that have been most successful, I've generally found that there is a person who's in charge of the creative, and there is a person who's in charge of production. Those generally should be two separate people. And I say that with a very simple reason, because it's really fucking hard to be both. So I've done 20 plus games. I've consulted on hundreds. If you open up my Moby Games page and see the games that I've been involved in, I don't remember half of those games. That's how many games I've been involved in at this point, right? But what I've found is being the two roles on two separate projects is really easy. I can be producer on one project and creative director on another project. That's easy. But being both on one project, it means that I basically have to argue with myself about a thing that I already have a preference on. And it just makes it incredibly, incredibly hard to do that, right? Now, for solo developers, that is an additional challenge, because if you're a solo developer, there's not really any way around it. It's just you, right? But this will be the hardest thing in your development process. We'll not be making the game. It will not be doing the production. It's switching the hat between the two and making sure you're doing both of them right. If you are extremely experienced or you feel confident doing both roles, even then, you should generally try to not be the one who does both of these things. If you have a friend that can help you or you have somebody you trust that can help you, that's better. But I like to separate out the creative from the production. And with that said, games production is also kind of a weird thing. So we have these two roles, the creative director and the producer. And in a games process, you could generally consider to go like this, right? You start at the start and you end at the end. But all of us know that that's not really how game development works. Game development looks a little bit more like this, where there's different processes that are all moving at the same time. There's dependencies, there's intersections. This needs to be done for that. And then really, this is not what game development looks like. This is more what game development looks like. Like certain things that are ready needed to be ready earlier or needed to be ready later, or we don't need them yet. Why are you doing that? Like everything is happening all at once and it's kind of a mess. So I'm not going to use this one because this is a mess. We're just going to look at this one. If you really look at a game development process, there's kind of three phases, right? And like the specifics of what happens in those phases, you can be as granular as you want about it, but there's really three phases of any game development. At the start, you're defining your game. What are we making, right? And in that phase, in that very early phase, you make the biggest choices about your game. Actually, the first choice you make, per definition, is the biggest one, right? I say the game has a jump. Okay, every game in which you can't jump is now out. It's no longer an option. You've cut away like 70+% of games, right? Are just no longer there. Say shooting, okay, it's nothing else. Say farming, it's nothing else, right? So your first choice is your biggest one, and you take this infinite possibility space and you collapse it into a smaller space in which your idea can exist, right? And every choice you make after that is a little smaller. And that goes through until you're starting to make really granular changes. So in that first part, we're trying to define sort of like the possibility space of our game. What could we make? Then in the second phase down here, this green part, I call that the affecting phase. So there's too many choices at the start to really have a lot of freedom anymore. But there's still large enough choices left that we can sort of like tilt where the game is going. So it's going here, we can still go this way, we can still go this way, but we can't go this way anymore, right? And then finally, when we figured out what the direction of the game is, we go into the production or implementation phase, and in that phase, we're not changing choices anymore. We've committed to a certain number of choices. Those choices are true. We're going to follow them through. And unless there is an emergency, we're not going back. Now, one of the important things I want to emphasize is between that blue and that green part and the green and that red part is something I call a one-way door. With a one-way door, I mean that if you can get your team to agree here on what we did in blue, when we get to green, we should not go back. We should not go the other way anymore, because the further down you get, the more expensive it's going to be to change those choices, right? So it is important to not waste time by thinking we agree, going past that point, then realizing we don't agree, and then having to come back, right? And now, these two roles that we talked about, right, the creative director and producer, they're actually kind of like chasing each other through this process. So the creative director is our dreamer, right? They want things. They want things, they want cool things. They want as many cool things as possible. The producer is the limiting factor. They're there to say, yeah, that's cool, but no, right? And so in this stage, the creative is experimenting, and they want to experiment. They want to experiment. I think if you would give a creative director infinite time, they would keep experimenting forever. They just wouldn't stop. They would just keep chasing interesting ideas. It's like, you know, an ADHD brain, just like this way, that way, this is cool. Oh my God, that's cooler, right? That's creative direction, and that's cool. Like they explore. The producer is trying to get the creative director to start defining, to start saying, okay, but write one of these down. Can we just agree on like one of these, right? And then the producer is trying to turn this into a definition. When you get to the affecting phase, when we have sort of our big choices, now the creative director is trying to define. So they actually want to keep experimenting until the producer shuts that down, right? At that point, they want to move on, and they want to move to defining. So they start writing things down, they start agreeing on things. At that point, the producer is trying to figure out, okay, but how do we actually make this thing? We have all these ideas, we have all these thoughts, but like, how long does it take to make a level? How long does it take to make a character? How much does it take to make a puzzle? How long for an asset, right? And in the final phase, the producer, well, the creative director is trying to expand. We have time for 5 levels. Okay, but what if we had 7? Like I played Elden Ring the other day. They have a really cool system. Can we take that? Can we copy that? Do we have time for that? Right? And the producer is just like, 5. We said 5. We agreed on 5. We're doing 5. It might have to be 4. Right? So this is sort of the structure of how these two roles sort of like chase each other throughout development, right? And if you put that back over these, the choices, like I said, sort of have reduced impact on the project and should have reduced impact on the project. So by the time we get to red, really no big changes should happen unless it is an emergency. And if you've ever been in a project when you get to red, you're like, oh my God, we need to change this. My one tip for you is when you get to the postmortem, figure out what the fuck went wrong, right? You should never get into the red zone and then have to go back to the blue zone or even the green zone. By the time we get to red, we should be certain. We should have confidence in what we're making. Our team should agree on what we're making. We should have tested what we're making. We should have play tested what we're making. We should not be in the red zone unless we are confident about what we're doing, right? So, how do we get there? Well, first things first, we need a video game. How do you pick a good video game? Well, I don't know. I've never figured that one out. What I have figured out, though, is that the best way to make a good video game is to chase an interesting thought or idea and prototype. And so I came from programming, like what I understand a lot of you come from programming, computer sciences, those kind of things. And yeah, that turns out to not be great for prototyping. Because we want to write good code. You know what's bad for prototypes? Good code. What's good for prototypes is bad code. We'll get to that in a second. Because really what we're trying to do with a prototype is actually we're trying to figure 2 questions out, which is our why and their why. Our why is why would we make this, and their why is why would we play this, right? And so these are kind of our 2 big questions. And our why is one of those questions that is both a very easy question, but it's actually harder than you think. Why are we making this game? If you're making a game, why are you making that game? You could say because it's fun. It's kind of a shitty answer, right? What's fun about it? What's interesting about it, right? So I do this exercise with a lot of teams. I call it the CMD model, or Core Mechanics Declarative Model. It's a little bit inspired by the MDA framework, if you've heard of it. But basically the way it works is that the middle is the core, and the core is the feeling. I don't care what the feeling is. I do not give a shit. It has to be a feeling. So what do you want your players to feel? Do you want them to feel clever? Do you want them to feel exhilaration? Do you want them to feel anxiety? Do you want them to feel surprise? Like, what is the feeling? In my game Nuclear Throne, which we released back in 2015, it was momentum. It was just a sense of momentum. We wanted things to keep moving, never stop, always more. more enemies, more experience, more abilities, more bullets, more stuff happening on the screen, more screen shake, lots more screen shake. That was at our heart. The heart of Nuclear Throne was about momentum. And every choice that flowed, that is in that game flowed from that single statement, momentum. We never stepped away from that. Not for a mechanic, not for a UI element, not for anything. Everything had to sustain, maintain, or accelerate momentum. Around that is your mechanics. And your mechanics, we can argue about what mechanics are all day. Everybody disagrees about this. My understanding of mechanics is simply, this is a thing that the computer can calculate based on an input and give you an output. It's usually a rule, could be a variable change, could be anything. The main thing is it's not communicated. It's just happening in the computer. A mechanic happens in the computer, it doesn't happen anywhere else, or in the board, or in the rules of your game if it's a board game or anywhere else. Now finally, you've got your declarative layer, and your declarative layer declares stuff to the players. It's your graphics, your audio, your narrative, all of that stuff, right? And now in a well-structured video game, things point inwards. So everything that declares to the player supports the mechanics. Everything that supports the mechanics supports the core. Sometimes you can skip, so in declarative thing can go straight to the core, but you very rarely see something where you define the core because you have a mechanic. Or you define a mechanic because you have a declarative problem. That very rarely happens. Doesn't mean it can't happen. For example, narrative games sometimes invert some of this, right? But in general, a game would look like this. For the roles on your team, that looks like that. Your creative director protects the core, your designer and programmer implement the mechanical layer, and then your writer, artist, audio, all of those people, they implement your declarative layer. I'm not trying to assign any importance or hierarchy to this. The people in the declarative layer are as important as the people in the mechanical layer are as important as your creative director. I just want to make that abundantly clear because sometimes people are assholes about this. If we talk about their why do people play video games? Why do people play video games? Well, people play video games because they want to spend money on people lying to them. That's it. Our job is professional liars / magicians. I can prove this to you really quickly. What is the importance of these values on the screen? Do they matter? Do they signify some achievement or great ability? No. That is the number 32,600. It is a variable in the computer, and it means nothing. The only reason it means something is because we present it like this. And because we made a little list out of that, GET over there feels much better about themselves than TGI over there. There's no reason for that. This character is not real. Morden does not exist. Morden did not die. Morden also did not survive. Morden is a bunch of polygons and some audio files. And Baldur's Gate, you can't visit it. It's not real. Our job is liar. That's it. That's the full thing. And people pay us, as a contract, to lie to them, to give them feelings. That's the full job, right? So, how does that work? Well, that works fairly simple. You have a player, and a player has something called a mental model. This is a model that exists. Ralph Koster sort of came up with the first version of this. But the player has something called a mental model. It's an understanding of a game. We all have this. We have this before we play a game. If I say we're going to play a racing game, yeah? We're going to play a racing game. We're going to play it on an Xbox. Which button or trigger do I use to accelerate? I see people do right trigger. It's because it's right trigger, right? If we're doing a platformer and we're going to jump on PC, what's the jump button? If I had a platformer and the button to jump was J, how much would you want to murder the designer? just by show of hands, please. Yeah, good, okay. We have a mental model. We have an understanding of how games work. And that mental model informs what we think. Now, this mental model exists on a larger scale, on sort of like the gaming scale, genre scale. After you see marketing, you have an expectation of the game. But it also updates every frame of the game. So as information hits our brain, we're updating the state of the game, and we're understanding what is happening in the game, right? So that creates an intent. We see the state of the game. We go, oh my God, I want to do this. And then we press a button. That intent turns into an input. The input goes into the computer The computer calculates a new game state based on that input, right? And then it outputs information from the new state of the black box back to the player. That new information goes back into the player's brain, and that updates their mental model. Yeah? So this is kind of the cycle of that. Now, it is important to recognize that this cycle has one interesting oddity, which is the game is in the lower left, but really the game is in the top right. The game as it exists on the computer is an artifact. It's not a thing. It's just a bunch of code, numbers, high scores, stuff like that. But where the game is actually happening is in the player's brain, exclusively in the player's brain. It does not have any value outside of that, right? So if we pull this kind of back out, if you have this model, really, the declarative layer takes place between the black box, the output, and the mental model, right? That's where output happens, and that's where meaning happens. The blue part of this model, the mechanics part, happens in this part of the game. That's your mental model, your input, and your black box, right? So when you're thinking about this, do me a favor, right? If you have a game that is systemically identical but declares itself differently, is that the same video game? Let me give you an example. If you take a really complicated boss fight in Dark Souls, does having a health bar for the boss, does that change the game? Yeah? Would you approach the boss differently if you didn't know how much health it had left? Right? So this is a completely different video game despite being mechanically identical. Right? And so when you look at games like this, you start seeing that there are specific things that you want to be focusing on when you're in this prototyping phase of your game. Yes, you can focus on getting all the mechanics exactly right. You can focus on getting the declarative exactly right. But the main thing we should be focusing on is that mental model in the top right. Can we give people the feeling that we want? The experience that we want? If we're making a roguelike about climbing, can we get people to be excited about going up? That's the prototype. That's the question. That's the part we don't know. Because I know I can make a roguelike. You can make a roguelike. I know you can make a platform. I can make a platform. But as soon as you add something of meaning, of value in it, that's where question mark starts happening. That's what we're focusing on with the prototype. We're not trying to build a video game yet. Please do not, for the love of God, try to think of a prototype as a video game. Prototype is something you make, you look at it, you check whether it works, and then hopefully you burn it. Because the code should be embarrassing. The other thing you might want to look for is this one. This is a time thought loop. It effectively goes very simple. That first cycle, the small circle, is a 1 second loop. Take a shooter, Halo. In 1 second, what are you thinking? I'm thinking there's an elite shooting at me, so I'm going to step to the right, I'm going to put my crosshair on the enemy, and I'm going to pull the trigger. That's about as much time that your brain has capacity for in 1 second. Now, in 5 seconds, I might be thinking, you know what, that elite is almost dead. There's 2 more grunts. That grunt has a grenade. Maybe if I go sideways and grab a slightly bigger weapon, I got that one. In the 15-second loop, you might be thinking, okay, there's still quite a few enemies on the left. If I go around the right, I might be able to pick them off, and you're thinking more on the positioning level. My theory, and this is untested, but my current understanding of video games is that video games happen on the places in between. So a video game's depth is defined by how many of these contrasts we can meaningfully create. Because if all of Halo was just put crosshair on face, pull trigger, it would not be an interesting game. It is that on these different cycles, we have different considerations that makes it interesting. Right? The contrast is the glue. I'm going to pull up the MDA framework, not particularly because I like it, but because I think it's important. I don't actually really love the MDA framework, but I do think it has an important meaning. It has one important, really important consideration built into it, which is in the MDA framework, we assign mechanics, again, the calculations, the rules, the way the computer can calculate it, and the aesthetics are the feeling of the game. Not joy, but something abstract, right? The dynamics is what happens in between those two. The important part of this framework is that we cannot create the dynamics. We can create the mechanics, we can create the aesthetics, the dynamics happen in the player, right? And so, if you would assume it this way, then we're actually creating from the left, but the player is experiencing the game from the right. The player has feelings first, and then understands the mechanics a certain way, and because of that, does something, right? It's that old trick of like, in most games, most somewhat older games, there is no sprint. It just doesn't exist. We just change the FOV. We make the screen shake a little, but the walking speed is the same, right? It just feels better. You can make a game without a sprint button, and everybody will complain about a sprint button. You can increase the walking speed to the sprint speed, and people will still complain that they want a sprint button. But if you give them the option to sprint, now they feel there's a sprint button. Right? So it doesn't matter what you increase the walking speed to, it matters that there's a button. Right? This is important to understand, because what is important to understand is that the things that are interesting to us to implement are not necessarily the things that are interesting to the player to do. Right? We're programmers, we're creatives, we like stuff. But what we like is not necessarily meaningful to a player. Right? If we take this model out, actually I think the MDA framework matches fairly well. So you can look here. But what we are looking for in this entire stage is we're trying to get from core to dynamics. We're trying to get from aesthetics to dynamics. Can we get players to do the thing we want? Can we get people to play the game we want them to play? And can we get them to generate the feelings that we want them to feel? So how do we figure that out? Well, we do that with prototyping. We do that with prototyping. And with prototyping, effectively what we're doing is we're asking questions and we're making the answers to those questions. So does this work? Is this fun? Is this interesting? Will people play this for 5 minutes? That's a very good question to ask, right? We do that through the iterative process. I'm sure you've been taught the iterative process, but in case you have not been taught the iterative process, let me quickly go through it. Effectively, it's a short loop in which you define a problem, brainstorm a solution, implement it, and then validate it. The shorter this loop is, the better it is in prototyping. You can prototype something in 6 weeks. That's long. You can do it in 2. That's long. You can do it in a few days. That's better. Right? Prototypes should be fast, because again, they're not video games. They're questions and answers. And the more time you spend on a prototype, the longer it's taking you to get to an answer. The number one tip I give programmers, or teams that work with programmers, is that you should always write your prototype, whatever way you want it, as long as you agree beforehand that you will delete everything when you're done. Just make that promise to yourself. We are not going to keep this code. This code is going to get thrown away. And program it that way. Program it that way because otherwise your training as a programmer will get in your way. You will write it modular. You will write it in a way that is easy to extend. You will write it in a way that's easy to maintain. And you should not. Your prototype should be reckless and dumb. It should be programmed in such a way that if you have a walking speed that is 10, you can increase that when it's too slow to 12. Or you could say, fuck it, 50. And that might be too fast, and I'm not going to do that. That might be too fast. But then you can say, okay, that's too fast. How about 30? Still too fast. How about 25? Getting there. Okay, 20. You could have gone 11, 12, 12.5. It would take hours to get to 30. Or you could just say double half. Be reckless. You want to make an arcade game better? You're doing an arcade. I saw a few arcade games out in the hall. You want to know how you make that game 100% better in about 10 minutes? Double the amount of enemies and half their health. Done. Better game. Guaranteed. 100%. Not even joking. Your game will be better. Why? Because explosions are fun. That's it. You're trying to give people the feeling of destroying lots of stuff. That's an arcade shooter. So give people stuff to shoot. Balance-wise, it should approximately land at the same place. So just do that, right? Recklessness. Don't be careful. Allow yourself to break stuff, right? Got to break an egg to make an omelet. And what we're aiming for in this prototype is coherence and communication. What we're trying to get to is we're trying to get to a place where there's a consistency to your game. Things feel like they belong together. And we're trying to find a way to communicate that. This is something that I think is important. When you're at this stage of your game and you're starting to feel that it's starting to come together, you want to know what the best thing is you can possibly do? Fake a Steam page. Don't make the Steam page. Fake the Steam page. Take a screenshot of a Steam page, make a few fake screenshots, write the little description that goes in the top right. Can I talk about this game? Is there an interesting way to talk about this game? And the exercise I do with my teams is very simple. Say you finish your game. Is anybody here working on a game right now? Oh, God. Is anybody working on a game that they're pitching right about now? Can I ask you, can you describe your game to me? All right. So say I play your game, right? And I love it. Love your game, right? And now it's 2030. It's been a few years. I played your game. I remember it vaguely, but I don't exactly remember it, right? And I have a friend. This friend, I think my friend would love this game. I forgot the name, I forgot your name, I forgot the developer, I forgot everything about it, right? I just remember the game. And I go to my friend and I say, well, what's the description again? It's a roguelike deck builder where you create your own cards. If I tell my friend that and they put that into Google, will they find your game or will they find 100 games? They will find 100 games, right? What is the sentence of your game that would allow that to work? Right? What sentence 10 years from now will still be the thing that gives your game, maybe not the top result, but like top 5 results? You want mine? Ridiculous Fishing is a game about fishing with machine guns. Guarantee. Google that, you'll find us, right? The sepia game with airplanes. Live for ousters. Guaranteed. It'll work, right? What is your sentence? What is the thing that 10 years from now people can tell each other and go, oh, fuck that game. Yeah, I remember that, right? It'll never be just genre plus mechanic, right? And even though that's a pretty good one, I've not heard that one very frequently, I think it could be better. Right, you could get to the point where that's the thing where 10 years from now I'll go like, oh my God, I played that game. It was deck builder, and you like, you know how to fill that in. I don't know your game yet, but I would like to play it. Cool. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to create stakes, things we agree upon, right? Things that we all think are true. And the reason we do that is because games, when they're still creative, they're amorphous blobs. They can take any shape. If I tell you there's a game with a castle in the sky, it's in the clouds, you're a knight. You're going to fight a dragon. Can you imagine that? Okay, what if I add, and the knight has an F-16? Can you still imagine that? Works, right? Doesn't work for the video game. That's bad. Our brain is really good at just making up shit and going like, oh yeah, well, it'll work. It'll work. This part of game development, the prototype part of game development, is about saying, okay, this blob can be anything, but it cannot go outside of this range. And as soon as you get that, that's when the video game starts happening. You're giving yourself limitations. You're giving yourself direction and focus, right? So that's what we're trying to get. And then when everybody agrees on that, when we have that prototype and starting to get there, we want to get buy-in. So you get your team together, you talk to each other, you sit down, you make stuff in the languages of the people. I don't mean like Austrian or like, no, I don't mean that. I mean art. Artists create art. I mean narrative folks create a draft. I mean musicians jam. I mean programmers prototype. Designers think and then write some shit. Spreadsheets, exactly. That stuff, right? Let people create in their own language, right? Put all of that together in one file, have everybody look at it and go, yeah, that sounds about right. And when you go past that point, you all have agreed that this is what you're making. This will help because about 6 months later, your artists will realize there's more time and they'll try to increase the quality of the art in level 3, which will fuck up level 1, 2, 4, and 5 because now the quality of the art there is worse, right? So if we have a baseline that we all agree on, we can point back at it and say, this is what we're doing, yeah? During this process, this is the creative director. This is what the creative director is doing. What the producer is doing in the meantime is crying. Because this is creative. There's not a hard date. There's no like exit. So you can spend 6 months, a year in this period of time just figuring shit out. The producer's job is to not. They have only one tool that they can use that I have found is effective. You can't say you have 6 months to come up with a game idea. That's nonsense. That's not how that works. You can't say you have 3 months. But what you can do is you can do relative velocity. We take 2 weeks to figure something out. You tell me in 2 weeks you're going to have something cool? Cool. Let's give you 2 weeks. After 2 weeks you come to me, you're like, oh, we're 90% there. I play it, I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, cool. How about 2 more weeks? 2 more weeks, okay. We were 90% there in 2 weeks. I expect to be at 180% in 2 more weeks, right? But if in 2 weeks you come back to me and you go like, oh, we're now at 98, I'm not sure I'm going to give you another 2 weeks. Not because it's not good, maybe it is good, but that's a good decision-making point. We can spend another 2 weeks And then we'll be at 90 and 99%. I'm not in a much better place. So if I see momentum slow down on something, I tell the team, okay, this is cool, you get one more sprint. Figure it out. And then we don't kill it, we don't stop. But if we're not entirely happy about it, we just try something else. And maybe with that something else, we figure out what's cool about the first thing. Or maybe we'll figure out it's not good at all, right? So the producer is using momentum as a measuring stick to slow things back down, to get things moving. Sometimes you find things on the first try, sometimes it takes you weeks, months to get somewhere. But the only tool the producer really has is momentum. Protect the momentum. Now this is the first time you can start pitching. You have a prototype, you have some mock-ups, you have some fake screenshots, you have a bit of a draft of the narrative, you know what you're making. Is it good? No. Is it a vertical slice? No. Is the publisher going to sign it? Hell no. Way too early. But you don't have to start talking to publishers only when you have a fully completed pitch. If you have some publishers that you have run into or whose work you like, if you think they're a good fit, send them an email and say, hey, we're working on a prototype. We think you might like this. We're not quite pitching yet, but we just wanted to put it on your radar. And just send them a shitty prototype. They're not going to look at it and go like, this is shit, we're never going to talk to this person again. That's not how this works. You can pitch the same game 3, 4, 5 times over a period of 2 years and be totally fine. Nobody's going to blacklist you for emailing them something. They might blacklist you if you keep doing it every week, but otherwise they don't care. Right? That's their job. So for the second part of this, we're going to go work on the slice. And for the vertical slice, I think there's 2 things that are really important. Is this water? Such a weird question. I'm like, you can tell that I've been in many places because in some countries this could be vodka. I don't drink, so that would be a problem. Oh, I'm talking too much. At this point, there's 2 things you want to figure out. Features and content. What is your features? What are your content? And this will give you clarity. Now, one thing that a lot of people get wrong about the vertical slice is they think it's a creative milestone. That this is the creative director's milestone. The previous milestone was the creative director's milestone. This is the producer's milestone. The producer has one goal. Figure out how long it's going to take to make this fucking video game. That's it. That's the one job. That's the one goal. That's the only reason we care about the vertical slice. To do that, the side effect is we have to make at least one piece of content, which might be a level, it might be a sequence, it might be a battle, it might be an environment, it might be anything. But we need one. We need one of each important thing, whether it's character, ability, weapon, whatever it is, we need one. We need to know how long this takes. How long does this take? What is going wrong in developing this, right? So we need to figure out features and content. So I define features as verbs, walk, jump, die, win, lose, save, load, and content as nouns, right? So features, verbs, content, nouns, and I separate them out this way. We'll get back to this a few more times. And as we figure this out, the creative director is trying to get some additional buy-in on the pillars, the USPs, and the alignment. Now, I want to be very clear. When we talk about pillars and USPs, we're kind of talking about the same thing. Pillars and USPs are both truths, fundamental truths about the game, but the pillars are internal. They're things we talk about. So for Ridiculous Fishing, we made a game where quite simply, it's a mobile game. You tilt your phone to dodge fish. You press the screen to shoot fish. We wanted this game to have an infinite positive feedback loop. We didn't give a shit whether you were good or not. So if you played the game and you did like, we still wanted you to win. We are not going to tell the player that they can suck at our video game, because then they wouldn't play the video game. We told our player they're really good. Well done. Here's a star. You know? But we wanted this to always be the case, no matter how bad you played, because we wanted people to play this on the train with half their attention. So we didn't want people to have to play well to do well. We wanted them, if they did well, they did better. But the worst case scenario in Ridiculous Fishing is you will do well, right? That's a pillar. Now, you might also want to do anti-pillars, which is effectively, hey, when you see this game, you might think X, Y, and Z are true, but actually, it's not. Right? You might see a shooter, you might think, okay, this is going to be a very action-based game. Maybe it's not a shooter, maybe it's a building game. I don't know. I see a lot of weird games. In that case, you might want to put that as an anti-pillar. Your USPs are basically the same thing, but for an external audience. So for Ridiculous Fishing, it's a game about fishing with machine guns. That didn't exist. That's a unique selling point. While the creative director is figuring that out, you as a producer are defining your production. To do that, let's go back to this. Features are harder to cut. They're harder to scale. The easiest way to figure out whether something is a feature or content is a very simple question. If we cut this, is the game fucked? If the answer is no, it's content. If the answer is yes, it's a feature. So, say we're making a video game and we're going to cut a level. That's content because we can cut it. Not a problem. If we're going to say, okay, we're going to remove jump. Is it going to screw up the game? Yeah, we're going to have to redo every level that uses jump. Right? So the producer is trying to figure out these two things, and they're trying to prioritize features, trying to pull forward features. What features do we need to prove this game? What things do we need to prove that this works? They make a walking skeleton where you effectively say, these are the most important things in the game. And for most of these things, actually, you can see why I picked those top ones. Because, okay, if I have a game where I want to shoot, say it's a shooter. I need to shoot, right? So if I wanted to prototype a melee, would I have to program something new, or could I just make a gun with a very short range? I'm just going to make a gun with a very short range. If I want a shotgun, do I need to make a new weapon, or just do I shoot 6 bullets with spread? I'll just do that, right? Bazooka, that's a bullet, but when it hits something, it creates a sphere. Anything in that sphere also dies. And so with very little work, I can prototype all those things by just focusing on the one that has the most similarities with everything else. Right? And same thing, you can really think of jumping as just diagonal walking. In the code, that's what you're doing, really, right? Like, we're not doing anything weird here. It's still just movement. We're still moving in a direction. It's just at some point there's a movement in the other way, right? So for each of the major pillars, you're going to look at what is the most critical thing we need, and we're going to implement only that. And then as we have time, as we establish that this is working, we start adding more and more until we have some sort of shippable product. Producer, in the meanwhile, is trying to figure out how to get that hierarchy and structure in there. Have you ever heard of a RACI chart? Okay. For those of you who haven't, RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed. If I can be very blunt about it, R, responsible, means you're doing the fucking work. A means if you fuck it up, it's your fault. C is we will ask for your opinion, and I is we don't care about your opinion. Right? That's effectively how this model works. Every task can have only one A. One A. This is the person who's in charge. They might also be doing the work, but that's not a requirement. But they are in charge of it. They're responsible for it. Your creative director is going to be, for example, responsible for the vision. Now, say at Vlaambeer, there were games where JW was creative director. Luftrauser, he was creative director. We got in an argument over clouds. I thought the clouds should look like clouds. He thought they should look like Japanese water painting clouds, which look like squiggly things. We had a 3-day discussion about this. Ultimately, he went with my idea. So we did clouds that look like clouds. I thought that was very sensible. If it turned out in the reviews that people hated the clouds, whose fault is that? Not mine. He's accountable. That means he has power to make the ultimate decision. So if he went, no, we're doing the water painting clouds, at some points I just got to shut up and do the work. Right? But it creates clarity within your team as to who's responsible for what. Who do I talk to about this? I'm not sure about this. Who gives me the ultimate answer on this question? Right? Having that creates clarity, and clarity makes things better. And so one of the things we're doing with that A is when, honestly, if you don't want to do the other ones, if you just want to do the A's, I'm already happy. Right? I don't care. But the amount of indie studios that have shipped their first game, it was a hit, and then they end up fighting for 6 months on what the next fucking video game has to be because they never decided who's in charge of picking the video game idea. I earn a lot of money helping these teams make a decision because they think it's a flat hierarchy. Valve once wrote an article, the flat hierarchies are good. Fuck them. They're bad. Nobody at Valve thinks they're good. I've never talked to anybody at Valve who's like, oh my God, flat hierarchies are the best. Like, it makes it a weird political backstabbing thing. You can do a co-op. You can do a worker co-op. You can do any form of company. Just please assign somebody. I don't care how you do it, democratically, capitalism. I don't give a shit. Pick something. Pick somebody who's in charge of a thing. And then if it fucks up, it's their fault. Right? We're setting up these lines of communication so that we can create trust. We can create certainty. Because the creative director is responsible for the clarity of goals. They say, this is the morning star, this is where we're going, this is where we're heading. And the producer is in charge of constraints. If you have that with accountability, so if they fuck up, they take responsibility for it, you create trust. Trust in this position is incredibly important, especially if you're a larger team. But think of it this way. If I told you, who is a modeler or an artist? Is there any artist in the room? Okay. If I told you, please make a chair. Yeah, a chair. I just want a chair. Okay, it's a bad chair. How do you feel about that? No. Very excited about it? You very excited about it? Yeah, the chair's shit. Exactly. Is this a good collaboration? Why is it fucking up, though? Because I didn't tell him what chair he needs to make. I didn't give him a clear goal, right? Let's try that again, okay? I want a chair. I want it to be a bit more, I want this. Cool. You're too late. Does that feel good? You also don't really give a shit, right? Because I didn't create a clear set of constraints either, right? A good collaboration sits on two things. People know what is needed from them, and they know when it needs to be done and how it needs to be done. It's not a very complicated thing. Somehow, most game studios still fuck this one up. We don't joke when we say, please fill out your JIRA. We do want you to fill out the ticket so we know what the fuck's up, right? So, and thank you so much for playing along with that. I appreciate that. The reality is, these jobs are separate jobs. The person who sets the goal and the person who sets the constraints, those are completely separate jobs. There are a lot of work. And if we get these two people to argue, fight, balance shit out, we will get the best game we can possibly make with the time and money that we do have, right? Instead of going over. So, in a way, the creative director is the yep person, and the producer is the nope person. It's the simplest way of thinking about it. Now, the producer is setting up the timelines. I talk a lot about that in our talks. So I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I want you to think about one thing. We're in this vertical slice part, right? And the vertical slice is the production part. Now, for the creative part, we figured out we need some mock-ups, we need a vision, we need a goal, we need prototypes that prove our question marks. The reason we want all that is because the faster we get to that, the faster we can go to a publisher to get some money. On the production side, there's a few things that publishers really want. And the most important thing they want is a timeline. They want to know how long it's going to take for you to make this video game. The budget follows from the timeline. That's actually the most important thing. They care about the budget. But we can get to the budget by getting to the timeline. Now, if you take a game, you can generally, the production sequence, the part after the publisher, you can generally fit it into 4 parts. You've got your vertical slice, you've got your feature complete, you've got your content complete, and you've got your release candidate. Yeah? Vertical slice is what we're doing right now, right? We're trying to find out how long does it take to make one level, one character, one ability, one ebb, so that we can say, okay, it took us this long to make 1, so it's going to take us this long to make 12. Right? That's what we're trying to do. Feature complete is when the producer pulls forward all the features work. If I'm making a Pokemon-style inventory, say there can be 6 items on a screen, right? When can I test whether that's feature complete? What do I need for that? Well, I need an inventory. I need to be able to move through the inventory. I need to be able to check whether there's a second page if I have more than 6 items. I need to be able to use the item and drop the item. And then I'm done. That's feature complete. How do I test that? I make 7 bullshit items that do nothing. They're called A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. If that works, I'm happy. We're good. Feature complete. Move on. Right? Think about your game in this way. How do we get to feature complete? How do we test whether every feature has basic functionality so that we can start putting content into it that is meaningful? Usually, you're sort of pseudo-generating content at the same time. You don't want to be doing just features because then all the other people are just sitting around. So they can start working on content, but they have to understand that content might change if the needs of features change. And that will happen. You might have to throw away the chair, for which I apologize. Content complete, then, is all content is done. We do not count localization or any of that stuff, just core content of the game. Some people do that as one thing. Most people do it golden path, extended path, and then additional. So sort of like, this is what you need to get from A to Z. This is on top of that, this is on top of that. If you're thinking of an RPG, from A to B is your golden path. A few side paths for side quests is your extended. And then finally you have sort of like your details, which is just like, here's a little treasure chest, you know, that kind of thing. And finally you have your release candidate. That's the one we sent to Xbox, that's the one we sent to PlayStation, to Switch, and they will tell us why it's bad. We fix that, and then we ship it, right? Now, here's the only way I've ever found publishers really give a shit about this. It's not about the actual number, although obviously if you say, okay, we're going to take 12 years to make this game, they don't want that. But say you keep it within 2 years. They care about the ratios between those. Because scouts, they're not the people making the decisions in the end. They're the people who will take the decisions to the person above them who will just make the call whether we're doing this game. So the scout needs to prove that you're not full of shit. That's it. So say, okay, the blue is the vertical slice, right? The green is content complete, and the purple is, the green is feature complete, and the purple is content complete, okay? Let's say it works like that. So we've got our pre-production until vertical slice, and then production all the way to the end. So this seems reasonable, right? Like a small part of it is pre-production, then a little bit to get to feature complete, and then slightly long to get to production. These are also fairly reasonable. If I were to tell you, hey, I'm making an experimental deck builder, just doesn't exist yet, completely new mechanics, which one of these four would be reasonable? Second one, right? Lots of time figuring out our pre-pro, figuring out what the game is, how it works, okay? That works. Now if I tell you I'm gonna clone Slay the Spire, and I'm gonna make it about ninjas. Third one, right? Now if I tell you I'm gonna make an experimental RTS with time travel, and I tell you my timeline is the third one, would you give me money? No. Because I can't figure that game out in that period of time. That's a stupid idea. If I give you the money, I might as well burn the money. Right? This is how a publisher looks at this. It's pure business. If I give you money, are you going to burn it? And I'll be frank, I'm on the developer side, but we all suck at scheduling. We're awful. Have you ever asked a programmer how long something would take and they were right? Anybody ever? It does not happen. Artists sometimes. So yeah, adventure game, roguelike, stolen deck builder, RPG, you know, this is what they look at. Now I'm going to skip through this part because I've overscoped the stock. But I want you to think about these things real quick. The most important thing as a publisher is to prioritize. When we get to this part, we're going to make some choices. Some things are going to work, some things are not going to work. One of the most common ways of thinking about that is must, should, could, won't as a system. You go through everything in your game and you figure out what must be done to ship this game, what should be done to ship this game, what could we do to ship this game, and what won't we do to ship this game. As you go through, you'll slowly start seeing these things are needed to get this core vision working. These things are superfluous. We don't need them. The game works. It is already fun. Why are we building this new crafting system with 75 different new features that we have never tested if we can just not? And then the game is still good, right? Creative directors, especially designer and programmers ones, love overcomplicating shit because it is fun to program. And very often, your UI artist will come at you and give you shit because they have to explain it. Usually they're right. So listen to your UI artists. So you could use Moscow, which is the name of this model, to figure this stuff out. You can use weighted smallest job first, which is a little bit more of a backlog task. You can Google this one. I'm not going to. They do a whole bunch of stuff and then a number comes out. You can do a priority matrix where you figure out what is important and urgent, which is important and not urgent, which is not important and urgent, and what is not important and not urgent, and then based on that you do one of these four. You can use that. I don't care which ones you use. I actually use all of them. So for some things I use Moscow, for backlog I use weighted smallest job, for leadership I use this priority matrix. It's just not science. Just don't take this as science. If you get this and it says 7, and you think 4 is more important, fuck the 7, do 4. It's not science. We're not here to sort of to make like a quantity out of work. That's not how this works. It's not a science. But what I will say is the thing you want to be looking for really is your dependencies. So as you go through this process of doing this vertical slice, you will notice that art is waiting for something from design, right? They're like, oh yeah, we could do the art, but like the level isn't done yet. That's a dependency. Let's take note of that. Can we move that? Can we create a system in such a way that they can get ahead? Maybe some concept art would fix it, right? Maybe if we do concept art first, then level design based on the concept art, and then art can work on art based on the concept art, then with a piece of concept art, we can unblock both of these teams and keep it moving. So for the producer in that case, it's really valuable to start looking for who gets stuck where and why are they getting stuck? Can we solve that? These are the questions at that point the producer wants to be asking. I'm not going to read all of them because y'all can read. But I usually do a milestone splitting exercise, as in I will take each of the milestones that we've discussed and I'll tell each of the teams to say, okay, these are the things we need to do that and these are the things that we need to get that done. And if I see any contradiction, any paradox, any problem where I'm like, ooh, this seems like it's going to be too late for y'all, I'll try to fix that before we move into production, right? And so as we're doing this, we're creating stuff. And hopefully by the end of this, we will have one piece of content at production quality that we can show to a publisher. And if not, we just repeat and adjust until it all makes sense. And when it all makes sense, we can make a video game. This is also the part where publishers actually will invest in your game. So when you have that vertical slice, when you have your vision, when you have figured out how long it's going to take, and you've multiplied that by the amount of money you need to live a comfortable life, not a, this is the minimum I need to not be thrown out of my house and like eat bread, right? A comfortable life, please. You multiply the amount of months by the amount of people by a comfortable life, that's your budget. Will you get that? Probably not. The industry is a piece of shit right now. But we might as well start there, right? Because we're going to negotiate after that. Our goal is to get some commitment, so everybody's trying to commit. The designer, the creative director, it doesn't have to be a designer. Why did I say designer? The creative director is trying to commit to this proven vision. They have now proven that. They've proven that this works. They've proven that it's interesting. They've proven in the prototype without any art that people would sit down and play it for 15 minutes. Now for the vertical slice, they've proven that if you add more context, more meta, more other stuff, that they will play for longer than that. If those things are true and the game seems interesting, the creative director is now done. The producer is trying to set the constraints and the process. They're trying to figure out how do we make this game, how do we set that up, how do we make sure that none of our teams ever get stuck. Each of you will now have a clear set of goals and clear set of constraints. And what we do, we go back and we go through our second one-way door. The one-way door is here to make sure we all agree, that it's all written down, that everybody understands what we're doing, when we're doing it, and how we're doing it. And if everything's okay, we can go through that door without ever having to go back. That's how you create trust, that's how you create accountability, and that's how you create a game that a publisher would want to give money to. So for the end, I want to talk real quickly about what happens afterwards, but I'm not going to give a full talk about production because I'm already out of time. When you are in those early stages of development, your producer is usually trying to keep a zoomed out view, right? They're looking across the entire project. They're looking at the horizon of what's coming at the end. When you move into production, they switch that perspective to as close as possible. They zoom in. They look at every tiny task. Is it late? Is it on time? Who is delayed? Who is blocked? Who's having problems? Who's reporting that they're feeling stressed or overworked or that they can't get their shit done? When they identify such an issue, they zoom back out and they look for where to fix it. So they zoom in to find problems. They zoom out to fix problems. Creative director, please do the fucking opposite. Please do not, for the love of God, go to your artist and say, this chair is shit. Because you have now solved the smallest possible problem. Instead of the actual problem, which is that your artist didn't understand what chair you wanted them to make. So where did your art director fuck up? Why is your artist not clear on the chair? Was there no style guide? Was there no reference? Was there not enough time? Did you not onboard them correctly? So for the creative director, you want to zoom out. Does this level hit the vision? And then if the chair is wrong, we'll get to that later. Please, don't be that creative director in that GIF where the guy's like, move the toilet 2 pixels to the left, and then they move him and it's like, no, 2 pixels to the right. Like, don't be that guy or girl or person or human. Don't be that, because that fucking sucks, right? So you fix these things by zooming out in the opposite direction. So for the creative director, you look for problems zoomed out, and then you zoom in to the point of failure. For producers, you zoom in, look for what goes wrong, and then you zoom out to the process level. Yeah? Then I have one other rule that I want to give all of you, because this one makes me very tired. Stop trying to make games that are 100% good. Stop it. Everybody looks at the shit and is like, oh, this has to be great. This chair has to be great. The chair doesn't have to be fucking great. It's a fucking chair. What's your favorite? Whose favorite video game here is like Chrono Trigger or something? Yeah, how much of Chrono Trigger is good? Is the forest good? 85? Is walking through a forest good? Is hitting slimes, is that like a particularly exciting part of the game? No, right? If you think about every good video game in the history of ever, 75% of the game is just good enough. It's just basing. It's just there to create a little bit of context. You know why? Because you need a baseline that you can go above. If your entire game is at 100%, nothing stands out. But Chrono Trigger, what's your favorite moment in Chrono Trigger? Magus, everybody like, same. Because that's a fucking standout moment. You have the cow, you have the moon, you have the whole thing is like this incredible masterclass of game design. That's that 5. 70% of your game needs to be good enough. 25% of your game needs to be good. 5% needs to be so fucking memorable that, what is it? How old is Chrono Trigger? 20 years? 19 years? 19 years later, we're still saying like, oh yeah, that moment was the big moment, right? 19? No, it has to be older than that. It's 2000. It's 29. Yeah. We're missing a decade, I think. We're old. Shit. Can anybody Google when Chrono Trigger is, just so I can cry for a moment? Shit. Yeah, fair enough. Anyway, 95. Okay. Shit. Anyway, we're still talking about that moment. We're talking about that moment because the contrast between the baseline and that moment was so large that we remembered it. Nothing in that 70 ever got us to go, this game is shit. It was good enough. Make your game good enough. It's the same thing when people say, always give your full 80%. Whatever you do, please give your full 80% so that when you need to give 100, you can give 100. If you always give your full 100%, you have to give 120 to do better than that. So don't. Same thing with your game. Give your full 70 so that for 25 you can go above that and for 5 you can make it stand out. Right? Stop trying to make everything perfect. It's good enough. This level is good enough. This forest between the big town and the small town is good enough. It's fucking trees. Just copy-paste a bunch, for the love of God. Use SpeedTree, I don't care. And then I have one more rule, that's the 50 before 50 rule. At 50% of your timeline, you should be more than 50% done with your game. That's it. It's that simple. You know what done means? Done doesn't mean 95% done. Done means 100% done. A thing that an artist still wants to touch up a little bit, that's not done. You know when it's done? When you tell the artist no. Now it's done. That's the difference. Done is done, right? So at 50% of your project, you should feel fairly confident that 50% of your game is done. If not, start cutting. Because it will take longer. Certification will take longer. QA will take longer. Localization will take longer. At 50%, be at 50 or above. Cool. I'm not going to talk about that because that will be too ironic. Oh yeah. Real quick, some of the biggest mistakes I really quickly want to talk about. Glue being late. So remember how I talked about that arrow between the circles? That's what holds your game together. So if you're making an RPG, very often what I see is that people will make the combat system. They'll make the RPG combat system, and then they'll make some exploration. Why do we play RPGs? Story? Numbers. What do the numbers do? They go up. Sorry? For the fantasy. Story, world, numbers goes up. What do we not play RPGs for? The fucking combat system. Who in the world ever looked at an RPG and went like, oh my god, yeah, no, I fucking love the combat system. Shit, I know Bravely Default was pretty clever. I forgot how it worked. I just remember thinking it was fairly clever. I can still tell you the full story of Golden Sun, front to back, back to front. I don't care in which order you want me to start. I can still do it, right? So if you're making an RPG, for the love of God, start with the progression system. Number goes up. What number? Give me the numbers. Make them go up. If you make a combat system, that is in service of number goes up. Not the other way around. We don't do number goes up because we have a combat system. We have a combat system because it makes the number go up meaningful, right? And same thing with the story. We don't just create a combat system because we need a combat. We have a combat system because it creates spacing in the story. It gives us breathing room. It gives us time between the story beats. Because if you go like, Lavos is real, he's going to destroy the world. You beat him. So we put 45 battles in between. That's why we have it. We didn't create that town because we needed a town. We needed a town so we can give stakes and time, right? And then the other thing, if you've worked on larger projects and you're coming into games, or you've worked in different industries and you're coming into game, for producers, it's really easy to think that how big companies do game production is how it should work. So you will read lots of stuff about writing 60-page game design documents and shit. Don't. I'm not saying don't write a game design document. I'm saying the reason they do that is because they're 250 people. If those 250 people work in opposite directions for a week, we need to pay 125 people to unfuck that for a week. That is more money than your indie game production. So before they start moving in directions, they make sure they are fully aligned on everything. You are probably 4 to 12 people. If you all go in different directions, please skip your Netflix subscription for the next 6 months and we're good. We're even again. Start moving, see where it's not right, and fix it. Because it won't be that expensive. Writing for 6 months a game design document that we all agree with, however, is fucking expensive. Because that is 6 months times 4 times the monthly salary. That's a lot of money. So when you're doing any sort of alignment exercise, keep in mind, how much do we actually need to align on this? Or how much can we actually just start moving on? Because very often the answer is just start moving. And then figure out where we disagree. Just keep an eye on it. If you want any more of this stuff, you can find it at ramiismail.com. I don't think we're going to have time for questions, but thank you so much.